Neil, this Premier League season's nearly upon us. Are you looking forward to it?
I am, yeah. I think it's been an interesting summer. I think that there's a bit of being funny the business. I think you've seen the promoted teams really commit wholeheartedly. I think you've got a set of then Premier League teams in the sort of the middle camp who have been trying to pick the battles and who also already have a lot of players and a lot of money. And who need to move things around a little bit. And then I think you've seen a number of the what have been in the past and not where last season, but the top teams invest quite significantly. And I think it's still not settled. I'm expecting there to be a lot more that goes on across the next sort of 3 weeks. And we'll have a real sense of where everyone's at come September, and that we'll have seen everyone play 3 times, but also we'll know what the squad that everyone's running with is.
Yeah, so in terms of the summer transfer window, then, as a Liverpool fan, you must be pretty happy. I mean, obviously, there's a dark cloud over Anfield, which we'll get onto. But in terms of the transfer incomings, are you happy, Liverpool fan? You still got room for one more?
Well, I think there's room for more than one more. They're going to do 2 centre-backs from the look of it, from as we sit here right now. And I would like them to still do 2 more forwards. I think we can just sort of deal with the dark cloud because there's the reality of it is that it was, and it will remain really painful and quite emotionally significant for Liverpool supporters and players over the course of the season, and also a number of other players across the country who've got relationships with or played with Diogo at some stage. And I think that the response of the wider football world has been, unbelievably supportive. It'll be there, and it'll be there for a number of games. At some point this season, Liverpool go to Molineux, and that's a live prospect. Liverpool may possibly, I think, at some point play Porto over the course of the season. That all of those things will have quite a significant resonance for the club and for the country. But that said, what it has left Liverpool with in a practical sense, and it's horrible that we have to think about this, but they also didn't have a footballer who plays in that position anymore, and they've had to sort of move around that. So Liverpool so far have seen, 2 through transfers and 1 through tragedy. You've seen 3 of last season's from 5. The 5 players who played the most attacking time for Liverpool leave. So Liverpool have so far only replaced 1 of those. However you want to sort of carve it up in Ekitike, there's still a theory, an expectation, I think, that something gets resolved with Newcastle around Isak. And then what that throws open, I think, is, well, where are we going to end up? Is there going to be 1 more? And at the back, Liverpool have let Gerald Quansah go, so they need to replace him within the squad. Joe Gomez still has his injury issues, unfortunately. So Liverpool appear to have found themselves an 18-year-old they really like in Palmer. So there's an expectation there that Leone and Gahey get done, by possibly by the end of this week. So Liverpool there, I think we can expect 3 more in on top of what's already there, and then there's the possibility of another forward, and then in amongst all of that as well, there's the excellence of the signing of Florian Wirtz, who really comes in to do something that Liverpool didn't have last season. Liverpool didn't have a natural playmaker style midfield, and it was arguably Gravenberch deep lying, Szoboszlai furthest forward, and McAllister in the gap, but they shared that load out. Wirtz is a hard-working footballer, but first and foremost, he's a very, very creative one, and that's what Liverpool think they've bought.
In regards to the pursuit of Isak, where do you sit with this? Because obviously there was a lot of unhappiness and anger towards Trent AlexanderArnold for the way he went about his move. And I appreciate it's different circumstances, but it's hard as a neutral not to look at what Isak's doing to Newcastle and think you almost win some, lose some in that regards as a football club, that you've missed out on Trent. He's sort of done the dirty. Now Isak's going through in Newcastle. Where do you sit on how this is going about?
I think one of the Trent AlexanderArnold issues was the way in which he chose to communicate over the course of the season, and I think that was difficult, really. And I don't think that was ever an easy situation for AlexanderArnold. But there was a wide sense that it was long-term plan from his point of view that he was going to leave for free and go to Real Madrid. That was. And in hindsight, that becomes a difficult situation to refute. Whatever the reason, I don't believe he's gone to Real Madrid for money. I think he's gone because he's felt as though he's done everything he wanted to do at Liverpool and he wanted the new challenge. I genuinely believe that is the case. But that said, there was an argument that the new challenge was to be part of retaining the league title. Liverpool haven't retained the league title since 1984. Liverpool haven't done a League and European Cup double since 1984. He says, quickly doing the maths in his head. Yes, I'm pretty sure that's right. Liverpool haven't, effectively managed to go back-to-back on any trophy. Again, I think it is since 1984. So there was a challenge to be had here, but it was one that he didn't want. But that wasn't what the language was last summer and moving into the first part of the season, whenever it was, he spoke about it, and then that conversation completely disappeared. And then there was what, was perceived, I think, to be at the time as a lot of messing about. And I think with greater clarity, both behind the scenes, but I think also with the supporters, things could have been a little bit different. The other thing to point out as well is, not that I think this matters particularly, but he leaves without a fee. The Isak situation is Liverpool appear to be prepared to pay a British record between two British clubs transfer fee for him. And Liverpool, I think, have been relatively clear on that all the way through. I don't think they'll go all the way to 150 million, certainly not without sort of quite generous add-ons. But that's where we are. Within all of this, I'm more than happy for people listening, anyone, to conclude really that football supporters are hypocritical. Well, of course they are. We're in a situation where Newcastle are trying to force a transfer out of Brentford with Vissa and a low ball in them. It's clear, because of what ends up happening, that Newcastle spent much of the summer low balling Burnley on Trafford. None of this is to decry. There's other reasons to decry Newcastle's transfer strategy this summer. None of this is to decry this. These are perfectly valid things to go and choose to do in the marketplace and to respond accordingly. So, I think across the board, I think we do need to be aware that, everyone is remarkably self-interested in any given moment. I'll be dead honest. The main reason I haven't seen even what I've seen so far of Ekatike, if I'm, to be really frank. I think Isak's a wonderful player. But the main reason why I want Liverpool to sign him at the minute is so he doesn't play for any of our rivals. He's literally scored a goal in a cup final against us. And he's I think Arsenal and Chelsea massively improved both of them. Manchester City's a little bit different with Haaland. But, I'll be quite frank. I think Isak could do brilliantly for Liverpool, but I really like what I've seen from Ekatike. So, the best reason in a way is to ensure that we have him. I think he can really help us win silverware, and that's the most important thing. I think he would really help us win silverware. But if that one fell through and there had to be something else, then I'd say, okay, you roll these sleeves up and you go again. At this point, he doesn't play for us. I don't really have a particularly emotional connection to Alexander Isak yet. Hopefully, when he scores his 20th goal next season playing for the Reds, I will. But that might not happen. And if it doesn't, then good luck to him and good luck to Newcastle. I do think that Newcastle should have had a better strategy for the summer. And if what's true, that Isak has said to them at the start of last season, during last season, at the end of last season, that he viewed it as his last season for Newcastle, he wanted it to be his last season for Newcastle, then I would argue that what would have been in Newcastle's interests would have been to have moved him on in June, got top black for him, and already have lined up his replacements and have done that process across the 9 months of the season. Talked to the new player, worked out who wants to be part of this new journey with Newcastle, who wanted to lead the line into the Champions League. That's what they should have done. And they should have had a strategy. And you and I have talked, when we've talked about West Ham in the past, when football clubs, not involving managers, i.e. managers setting the strategy, but West Ham, for instance, had a terrible strategy around Lopetegui in the following summer. Yeah. It put the club back arguably 2 years. In one fell swoop, it moved the club back 2 years. And I think that the way Newcastle strategized this summer, if I was a Newcastle supporter, I'd be quite pissed off with Alexander Isak, but I'd be absolutely furious with the people who run Newcastle.
Yeah, I actually completely agree with this sort of new-ish information coming out that Isak had actually informed Newcastle. Because when it first came out that he wasn't going to Singapore, I thought, bloody hell, you've left it a bit late to inform your club, because transfer targets have already moved on. Arsenal have already committed to buying Gyökeres, so actually there's no bidding war going to happen here because you've let other clubs pick their players up, and now there's only really Liverpool at the table for Newcastle to deal with. But this new information is quite important, because if he has informed Newcastle, like you said, there's some suggestions that he did it last summer, but especially towards the end of the season, said I still want to go. I think he's arguably handled it right. But because Newcastle had Paul Mitchell leaving, director of football leaving, there was almost no leadership at that club going into the transfer market. But also Newcastle have that PSR transfer date of the 30th of June. So I think there's maybe a fair assumption that Newcastle were trying to get it done in July so that some of the transfer fee doesn't go towards last season's PSR. It's like, no, we want it in this season's PSR. So going forward, we're all right. But that delaying tactics, I think, is what's cost them. But you're quite right. It swings and roundabouts. Every club benefits, because you could look at Newcastle and say, well, you went after Anthony Elanga 12 months ago and you didn't get him, but you got him this summer. So you must have had some sort of indication from the player, at least, that said, I do want to come to you. Come get me next year.
But also the idea that there's some sort of courtly process with any of this now, given the sums of money that are involved, it's ridiculous. Why on earth would you put the legwork together to structure a really rather complicated £83 million deal, if you don't already know that the footballer at the other end of it, within reason, is at least interested in what it is that you're offering, you've got to at least reach that point. And I think, but as I say, I think the thing here is that it just doesn't look to me as though, and with the thrashing round for targets, it just doesn't look as though Newcastle had a plan. And I think that is, whether or not plans can go wrong. I've seen Liverpool transfer plans go wrong down the years, and this one with the Isak could still go wrong. Plans can go wrong, but it just doesn't look to me like there was one. And then there's, well, we want him. Oh, we can't get him. Okay, well, what about him? We'll try for him, and we can't get him. Okay, well, let's go for it. And then, but those players themselves, sort of know, well, you should have been talking to me months ago. We should have been working this through. Liverpool, supposedly, Arne Slot had a conversation with Ryan Cherky, who's ended up going to Manchester City, supposedly, even though Liverpool were in the throes of the conversation with Florian Wirtz. But that's because Liverpool keep this stuff open, play this stuff quite wide, and, look to cultivate relationships with agents and so on. As I say, I'll say again, listen, by all means, be annoyed with Liverpool if you support Newcastle. That's absolutely fine. Be annoyed with Isak. Yeah, absolutely. I can understand why, but I would remind everyone he scores, and he's a key part of the team that goes on and wins Newcastle's first trophy in however many years. But first and foremost, I'd be annoyed with the Newcastle hierarchy. I think that they've got to be better. And if they were better, then first and foremost, I think Isak could already be playing for Liverpool. But secondly, it's feasible that, for instance, someone like Hugo Ekitike may well also have signed for Newcastle if such a deal had been done in June.
Yeah, I do agree with that latter point, because that's someone they pursued years ago, and he obviously went to PSG at the time and said, if I did not go to PSG, I would have went to Newcastle.
Yeah.
So there's obviously a form of relationship between Newcastle United and Ekitike, but they've sort of sat on their hands a little bit, and I feel like almost Liverpool called their bluff. And the result was Newcastle calling Liverpool's bluff, and Liverpool went, well, go on then. Let's do this. You think we were, it almost felt like Liverpool weren't actually calling their bluff. It was almost like an actual threat, which is either let's do Isak or we're going to go get it. And Newcastle went, go on then. So Liverpool went, fine, we're going to go get him. And then we're going to come and get Isak anyway. So I feel like Newcastle had an opportunity to form a negotiation with Liverpool, which said, look, we'll give you Isak, but stay away from Ekitike so we can have a clear run at him. You get your main guy, we got our main guy. And I think Newcastle almost puffed their chest out a little bit and said, now we're Newcastle United, and maybe got a reminder that they're not quite there yet with the big boys of the Premier League. As a fan of Liverpool, as a fan of a club that's sort of won titles, expected to challenge for titles, how far away do you see Newcastle from you? Because coming out the season into the summer, obviously they qualified for Champions League but towards the end of the season, they went that far away from Arsenal. They were possibly going to finish runners-up. So do you see them as close to being a title threat, or do you think they've got some distance to go yet? Obviously, the summer's maybe just changed the dynamic a little bit.
I think these things come in waves. I'm dead intrigued by sort of the theory of this, in that I think you can have a theory as to how you're going to get yourself Champions League qualification, and then you can have a theory as to how you're going to sort of back that up, and then what's your theory of doing the next thing, because you build relationships. For me, I think that if Newcastle's theory has been so far, our plan is to win our first trophy in God knows how long and consolidate Champions League qualification, you can actually argue they've obviously done it relatively well. There was one more year to consolidate. I think they need to get the back-to-back Champions League qualification to feel as though they're there. But this stuff was always, for every club, it was always going to take steps. It's a different time, but it's worth sort of pointing out that the first season under Abramovich, after an unbelievable spend, Chelsea still finished second to Arsenal, and they had already qualified for the Champions League. Let's go to 2008. City had more to do, but the reality that they were dealing with was Arsenal post-stadium move, when things were beginning to go wrong for Wenger, Liverpool with a moment of decline, Tottenham not quite being able to own that space, so Chelsea and Man United being the overarching two in that period, and Man City just had to elbow themselves past all of that. There was a lot of elbowing to do to get there. They had to elbow past Everton as well, and there's a couple of other teams they needed to, but they were able to do that. But even then, it still takes that Aguero goal for them to win a league, and it still takes then for them to get the next one. It's still then another season missed thereafter, and then they get themselves in, and even then it doesn't quite hit the sort of the year in year out length that Guardiola ended up getting to, but they established themselves in that conversation in that bit of the world. So for Newcastle, you can argue that up to this point it's gone relatively well, with in what is genuinely harder territory. It's in territory where there is greater financial regulation has been arranged by the league and agreed by the league by this point, because they've learned from what's happened in the past and they've seen the ramifications it's had for the whole pyramid. And they've decided to do that. The action needs to be taken, and you can have any view that you want on that action. I'm just saying that this is the universe that Newcastle have to work through. So you can see that they've done pretty well. But what that requires, I'd argue, is again a real sense of a plan. But it also means that, well, consolidation is a thing. You have to retrench for a little period here, and then work out, right, we've retrenched and we've gone again. Liverpool still do this themselves. Liverpool's transfer business is worthy of, I think, people taking a bit of time to look at, but not just this summer, but in the round of summers. Liverpool tend, you can see a history of Liverpool tending to go quite big every other year. And then you can argue that Liverpool last went big approximately sort of 6 years ago, and now they're going big again. And part of why they're going big again is what they're conscious of is having signed them down to contracts. They know they need a plan for what happens post Salah and Van Dijk. So part of Liverpool's business at the minute, they're about to buy 2 centre-backs, for God's sake. They're buying Wirtz, Ekitike, and maybe Isak. That is remodelling an attack, but trying to do this so there's continuity. So you've got 1 or 2 more years of Salah and Van Dijk, and then you're able to say, right, now we unleash what's the next thing, because we can't have an extended period out of the Champions League. We can't drop away to come back. We've got to make sure we maintain at this level. But Liverpool last season don't buy anyone, and they're going on of an excellent season, but they don't buy anyone. Next season, I suspect Liverpool may well sell a couple, may well bring a couple in, but it'll be a smaller summer than what we're going to get here. But Liverpool have a strategy. This is how we're going to do it, and this is how we're going to go about it. And then Liverpool go and execute that, and that's what they're about. And I think that for Newcastle, listen, I think that last season they should have sold Anthony Gordon. Now it's easy to say they qualify for the Champions League and they win the conference, the Carabao. So that's a really good year. So let's be clear, I'm a gobshite. But I think they should have sold Anthony Gordon, and I think they should have kept Elliot Anderson and Nkuba Minter, because I think that Anderson and Nkuba Minter would be able to contribute more in a long-lasting way to Newcastle. And you retrench last summer, do Gordon, keep Isak, come to an arrangement there, and you're aware of the fact that you've got to constantly shake it up. And maybe then you do Isak this year. You've built around, you'd bought Harvey Barnes, you've had Minter off the other flank, plus Jacob Murphy, who has a great year last year, huge amounts of respect to him. But then this year, you don't need to go and buy Alanga because you've already got Minter. This year, you're not looking around saying we haven't got enough centre mid options because you've got Elliot Anderson. Yeah. And then you can go from there. But it's easy to say with hindsight. Of course it is. I said that at the time, but it is also easy to emphasise it with hindsight. But I think you've got to therefore have, like, this is the plan and this is where we're going to end up. And part of what would worry me if I supported Newcastle at the minute is I actually think they look like they're in a smarter nick in the last 7 days than they did the 7 days before. I think Jacob Ramsey coming in suggests there might be a plan to move Gordon through the middle, buy another centre forward, have Gordon through the middle, Barnes, Gordon, and Jacob, Ramsey, Alanga, Murphy, and then work the centre forward thing out. Buy another midfielder. Looks as though that's being mooted. Maybe Al Khanous or something. They've got themselves a centre back in. All things that they needed, but all of this now feels a little bit like, right, we've worked out, we've got to do something, and this is what we're doing. So I think for Newcastle, I think if they'd have had a greater sense of this is the breathing in and out period before we go bang, this is what we're about. My worry for them would be that they've made the consolidation harder. Whereas if they planned for, right, it's going to be 2 steps forward, then it's going to be a little bit of a tread in water. Then it's going to be, well, it was 10 steps forward, arguably, and huge credit to the manager. But then it's going to be a bit of tread in water. And then it's going to be 3 steps forward. But those 3 steps are really hard as well, are the harder steps than the previous 10. And then it's going to be a little bit of breathing in and out, and then we go. So I think for Newcastle, I think the idea should be, and still should be, it would be tremendous if they managed to genuinely challenge for the title by 28. And it'd be brilliant if they managed to win one by 30. And they should certainly be looking at winning one by 34. And that's fine. And that, I think you can explain that to supporters. They've just won the first trophy in 70. And this is back to, you just won the first trophy in 70 years. Let's have some great European nights. Let's try and win another trophy at some point in the near future. Let's have that in the back of our minds. Let's consolidate champions. You can bring supporters on that journey, I think, but you've got to therefore signpost it. You've got to do all the signposting and say, no, we know what we're doing. And I think at the minute for Newcastle supporters, they're looking around, and there's been a survey today from The Athletic about who's got hope and who hasn't. And Newcastle supporters have the least hope in the league. But part of that is because they're no longer on board with the journey. Yeah. They're no longer on board with the journey. Whereas if you support Leeds at the minute, the journey's really clear. We've just got to come 17th.
Yeah.
And I think clubs having that clarity of this is what we're trying to achieve this season, and we're all doing it together, and this is the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing. I think that's fine, and I think you can explain that to football supporters because they're not idiots.
Yeah.
And I think that's, so I think that's what Newcastle have got to look to do. But listen, I support Liverpool, so it's not my business.
Yeah, I think for me, I think Newcastle. You hear Saudi tax all the time and how they're reluctant to pay what they feel is over the odds. That they go after a player, they'll value him, and then the selling club will say, "Oh, X amount of million." You go, "Oh, Saudi tax." I don't think it is personally. I think it's just Premier League tax. I think most Premier League clubs have to overpay for players, and I think there's a little bit of Newcastle thinking, "Oh, woe is me. It's us. It's because it's us." And I think even if you still believe that, I think there's, for the time being, I think you've almost got to overpay for some players because. Could you argue that Isak is worth 135 million to Liverpool? It's a bit of a stretch to say yes, he is. So maybe they are overpaying, but what they're getting is the guy that they feel is perfect for what they want to do going forward. And I think there's been some transfer targets in the past, whether it's James Trafford, whether it's Mark Gay 12 months ago, that actually had they maybe just paid a little bit more, had they gone more than what they wanted to do, they would have got their number one target. And I feel like too much of their business this summer. I actually don't think the business is that bad because coming into it, I think they need a centre back. They've got one with Chow now. Need a goalkeeper. They've got Ramsdale. Need a right winger. Langa's there. But it feels like it's almost second target for every position. That they didn't get Trafford, so Ramsdale will do. Didn't get Gay, Chow will do. Didn't get Mbomo, Elanga will do. And I think one or two is okay. But I think when pretty much every transfer target you're coming down your short list, I think that's where that would worry me a little bit. You need to get your number one target in for at least half of the positions you're going after. And I think they're just a little bit too concerned about paying over the odds. And I understand why, because of PSR. But I think they need to play that game a little bit cleverer as well. They try to in Nottingham Forest, but as you pointed out, arguably they got their fingers burnt with it and they end up with a bad deal out of it. They tried to play the PSR thing and ended up getting stuck. So I just think they need to be a little bit more wiser as a football club.
Well, I think, but what I think that though I think has changed is they've got. So why I think they were, if you look at all the really smart business that they did for an extended period, it was players that bigger clubs, more established clubs had looked at and just weren't quite sure whether or not to pull the trigger. And that's what Isak is. Isak's one. Everyone knew about Gamarish. It wasn't a shock. Everyone knew what he could be capable of, but they weren't quite sure because the level he was playing at. A really clever comparison for this may well be that, for instance, the Newcastle of 2022 ends up finding a way to get Cherky through the door last summer, and not this. They go again, a player that everyone had talked about. Everyone knows about his level. Everyone knows what he could be capable of. Everyone knows what a creative force he is and a fulcrum he is. But no one was quite sure whether or not he pulled the trigger. And Newcastle, it's the sort of player that Newcastle did a really clever job of in that early flush of transfers, was they just took some gambles. And maybe that's what you needed to do, because and maybe that still remains the case, that you've got a sort of back that you can make these gambles and you can make them work and you can back your coach to bring the best out. But also then what happened was the Newcastle faithful took those players very much to the heart. They play well, they feel better, they're part of this community, it works really well. And that might be a little bit of Newcastle's unique selling point that they need to sort of lean back on, is we don't necessarily go even for the next cab off the rank for a Manchester United or even a Tottenham. We go for we're prepared to take a little bit more of a chance. A really good example, West Ham are a good example in the signing of Kudus going back a couple of years. A lot of clubs, Kudus isn't a surprise. We played against him twice in the Champions League for Ajax, and he scores at Anfield. Liverpool know how good Kudus potentially could have been. They just weren't sure about pulling the trigger on that at 40 million. And that's the sort of player which Newcastle were doing a good job of doing. And I think that there's a little bit more of that. Maybe there needs to be still, even though they theoretically are in the Champions League, maybe there just needs to be a little bit more of that in order to get themselves pulled along.
Right then, before we round up the podcast, we'll discuss a little bit of Premier League generally, who you're thinking is going to win the title, so on and so forth. Welcome everyone to episode 1 of my podcast. It doesn't really have a name. I knew I wanted to do a podcast, and I wanted Neil as my first guest. Neil's from the Anfield Wrap, in case anyone's unaware. So I got Neil on, and I'll decide a name later down the line. Just you subscribers can tell me what we think you should call it. I don't know, the Tartan Premier League outlook. I don't know. We'll come up with something. You going to win the title again?
Yeah, but as likely as anyone else. So I'll say yes. Listen, I think City are going to be really good. I'm not, I think there's every chance City are the other side of 85 points. I think Arsenal last season have really hard lines with injuries. I think they can go the other side of 80. Should go the other side of 80. I think it's going to be competitive between Liverpool, City, and Arsenal. I think it possibly just comes a year too early for Chelsea. I think they may well be a thorn in sides, but I think they may just not quite be able to genuinely hack the pace, because I think there's a fighting chance. Those three, we're all looking around 15 games in, and the played 15 and won 11 or 12, and draws and defeats could well be against each other. So I think it's gonna go off at a scary pace. But yes, I think we were the best side by, I think, quite a significant distance last season. So if we can, all we've got to do is sort of hold that and improve that. I think Viet helps. I think we're taking a couple of gambles in a couple of areas. I think we may be a bit more expansive than we were last season.
Yeah.
But I also think that we can just shut that down if we need to, and it'll be interesting to see once the real stuff gets going, whether or not Liverpool have that. So yeah, I would have us as favourites. But I think you take the other two for granted at your peril. I think it'll be a really competitive title race until at least the spring, and I think Liverpool will just have enough.
I'm in agreement with you. I think you'll retain the title, but I think the gap will be much smaller between yourselves and Arsenal, yourselves and Man City. And I will put Chelsea in there as well. But I've made it clear to my subscribers, I've been swayed by that performance against PSG. That performance against PSG by Chelsea, I thought was outstanding. But ironically, it's the Club World Cup that actually concerns me for Chelsea, because you lot were on holiday before the season even finished. You know, Arne Slot was in Ibiza. You were going away for a leave and do for Trent. Your players were going away. Like, it was, you were able to put your feet up before June. Chelsea season finished a month ago.
Yeah, it's going to be funny to see how that plays out. They both only played one pre-season game. I checked that the other day, and both played well in it. Yeah. And they may well both start the season really well, but just suddenly when you're looking around in November and December, this, oh my God, no one's legs work. There's a chance of that, and so I think we've got to, if that's the case, Liverpool have got to take advantage of it. We've also got quite a difficult first 11. We play 5 of the 5 other qualified Champions League teams. We play 4 of them in the first 11, and 3 of them are away. So I think if my eye on that is if we can be there or thereabouts come the November international break, then we have a real opportunity to make a bit of hay when the sun when the sun doesn't shine in the end of November and through December. But a lot of that is predicated on having the squad depth, because we will lose Salah to AFCON.
Surprise team? Anyone that you're thinking might just do better than some people are expecting?
So I want to sort of really, first and foremost, it wouldn't surprise me if Brighton are top 3, 4, 5 up to the halfway point even. I think that Brighton may well really benefit from the fact that they haven't got European football and other upwardly mobile sides have. So I think that Brighton may well sort of get people going, oh God, I didn't see that coming. I think it's the strongest, the most focused, and the most focused and appear to have a genuine strategy I've seen the 3 promoted sides in a long time. I think all 3 of them have done, I think, intriguing business, not overwhelming business, not, oh my God, they're gonna, they couldn't have swayed, they're going to be challenging for the top 6, but they look to have a real plan. Leeds have recruited a lot of physicality, which makes sense when you've already got players with the talent and the profile of people like Willie Gnotto, that what you actually want is to give them a platform to work on. So you've already got, if you're Leeds, you probably think we've got 3 or 4 players who we think are genuine Premier League quality. Then I think Sunderland have really gone for it, but I think even that's quite smart. To give a really good example, club captain Dan Neil may not prove to be a Premier League player this season, but he is a player who may well become a Premier League player in the fullness of time. But now he doesn't have to rush because Granit Xhaka's there.
Yeah.
And I think in a few other areas, for me, it looks to me like Sunderland have tried to get themselves into the situation where they've got players who could be around the calibre of players that Wolves have, and go from there as a start point and see where they end up. So I think that, Sunderland have had a really good go. Burnley, I think, looked like the least prepared of the 3.
Yeah.
They had 4 loans that they were under an obligation to buy, and they've done, I think, a few other moves. But what they haven't done is, it doesn't look to me like they're throwing the towel in. I think they'll be competitive. And I think that within all of that, I think that could be enough to worry, to an extent. And I'm going to name some slightly mad clubs here, but, that could be enough to worry. Fulham, who I think have looked like a really secure Premier League team. It could be enough to worry Brentford, who've undergone a lot of change in one summer. It could be enough to worry West Ham, who I think have actually shown shrewdness and control in what they've gone about and done. But if it doesn't pay off, or there's one or two early injuries, Fulkrug being a really... Listen, there's a universe where Fulkrug is this season's Chris Wood. There's a universe where he bangs 20, 25, but there's also a universe where he breaks down in the September international break. But if they can keep Fulkrug on the pitch with Bowen and with Paquetá and with a couple of the others they've got around, I think Juve's a really canny signing for West Ham. I think he'll do really, really well there, and I think he solves a bit of an issue on that left-hand side. But again, the same thing can happen. He could get an injury. And I think West Ham potentially look a bit thin, and it's valid to sort of say whether or not they've improved enough. And then even Everton, I think I think Dewsbury Hall's a really good signing for the Blues. I think Grealish is a massive gamble that they've managed to offset, but you've still got to have him in the squad. You've got to pay him. You've got to pick him. And if he rekindles magic, then you'll feel great. But if he's just a bit broken and a bit sad, then it could drag on. But I think Everton, could then... What I'm saying is, I think in the last couple of seasons, not only have the three that have come up gone straight back down, but they felt like a bottom three for most of the season. And occasionally they might drag someone in.
This year,
I think this year it might be a bit different. And I think also if the sides at the very top have gone up a notch and are more capable of week in, week out to be taking points. Last season we only take 1 point from 2 games against Fulham. If this season, that's 4 points they got from Liverpool. If this season they're getting 0 from Liverpool, 0 from Arsenal, 0, then that, I think, again, I think there's a chance, and I'm not saying it will happen, but my surprise thing is I think there's a chance there's like a bottom 8 and not a bottom 3 and then 10 teams. And that's my surprise thing. So I think Leeds could be a surprise. Sunderland could be a surprise. And I think that the other team, who if they recruit well, once they lose players, who I think could be another surprise, like Brighton said before, is also Crystal Palace. I think that the manager's really smart.
Well, give me a 3 to go down then.
Oh, it's horrible. Genuinely. Burnley, Wolves. I've got the list here. Burnley, Wolves, and one of Leeds or Sunderland. I think one of them stays up, and it's at the expense of the other one. So Burnley, Wolves, and one of Leeds or Sunderland. I just worry Wolves. Wolves look to me to be a Jurgen Strand-Larsen injury away from scoring 3 goals in 11 games.
Yeah, I think, obviously, just for people, I've done my league table prediction, right? Neil hasn't seen it. It's not published on YouTube yet. Right, I'll tell you this, Neil. I've got Brighton to finish 7th, I think, and I said I wouldn't be surprised they're even higher. Yeah. And I've got Wolves to go down.
Yeah, well, there we are.
So we're in agreement. I just think Cunha has the X factor, and they've replaced him with Arias, who looked good at the Club World Cup. I'm just not convinced he brings the X factor, and I think when you rely on individual quality, that's a dangerous thing.
Yeah,
but
no, I
if
agree.
that player leaves, you need to bring in someone with individual quality, and I'm just not convinced Wolves have quite done that. And they did well under Vitor Pereira for 6 games on the bounce. That was fun. He was in Wetherspoons after the game, having a pint with the boys. That was great. But I haven't seen him when the going gets tough. I felt like he went in there and things just got better straight away for him. He just rode this wave, got beat, lost the last 3 games of the season. Not a big deal. But I need to see more to be convinced that he's a long-term success at the Molineux. So I've got them to go down as well. But I put Sunderland to be the ones to stay up out of the 2.
You never know. I think it's going to be. I think it's going to be really interesting with the 2 of them, and it wouldn't surprise me if that's all the way to the last day. It's little things like Sunderland's first 3 are really nice, but that means they've got to take 7 points because So his Leeds play Everton first game, and if you were to rank at home at Ellen Road, if you were to rank Leeds' games from the hardest, number 1, Liverpool, Arsenal, and Man City away, that's your top 3, to the easiest, number 38. Somewhere between 28 and 38 is Everton at home. But to stay up, you've got to win somewhere between 8 and 11 games. So if Leeds win that one, then my God, it is actually quite a marked, important step forward. If they don't win that one, then they've already removed one of the more winnable ones. And they'll win one of the less winnable ones. They might shock someone. They might beat City or Liverpool at Ellen Road, and that might be in your top 10 hardest. But, you've got to offset that somewhere else. And that's what Sean Dyche, when he was keeping Everton up and Burnley, was really good at saying, right, this is a game we can win, so we'll write the ones off the other side. Whether or not he said that explicitly to his players, I suspect he didn't, but to have that internally. Or is 3 in a week. And this 3 in a week, we really like 2 of them, and we'll just go like demons for the other one. But we'll get so fit for those 3 that we can take 7 or 9 points. And I think that's what he was brilliant at. And I think with this season, I think if you Leeds or Sunderland's first 3 are really winnable. But if they haven't got 7 points at the end of them, even if they don't lose, even if they've got 3 points and it's 3 draws, you've knocked 3 of your winnable games off. You've just put a line through 3 of your winnables, and you've only got so many of them. So I think that's the way it is at the bottom. I think there's so fine lines. I think if you win 10, you stay up. I think if you win 8, it could go either way, and if you win 6, you're down.
Yeah.
So that's the way in which it is. If you win 10, you'd have to be unlucky to get relegated, because if you win 10, you can presume you're going to draw at least 6.
Yeah.
And I think that these sides that are coming up have got to have a really big sense of, so second game is Sunderland at home to Burnley. It's Burnley's on paper, Burnley's easiest away, and it's Sunderland's easiest home. And the worst thing that could happen in a way is a draw.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think what you're saying there is if a team wins 10 games, I think there's a fair assumption that the 3 that got relegated, they've probably won. Those 10 wins have come from against the teams that you won. So while you're picking points off them, you're pinching their games that they want to win, and you're pushing them down. So I completely agree. I think when you come up, you're looking at the other 2 teams thinking, we need at least 10 points out of these 4 fixtures against the 2 teams that have come up. So we gain the points, but we also shove them in towards that relegation. And then whether it's a Wolves, a Brentford, or a West Ham, we're picking on them as well. And we're hoping that the other teams pick on them too, and we push them down. So I agree. I think we're in for this. Premier League feels like the hardest one to call for quite some time, actually. And I'm all for it. I like that. It's important. That I do. I appreciate my team may be the ones that suffer, and we could end up in trouble. But what we cannot have is 9 promoted teams in the last 3 seasons coming up and 9 promoted teams getting relegated again. We cannot have that, because we will cry, not you, because you're a Liverpool fan, the rest of us will cry, PSR, we can't challenge the top. And I think that's fair. That's okay. I agree. But what we can't have then is to close the shop on the 17 and say, well, we're turning a big 6 into a big 17. We're pulling the drawbridge up. So we're complaining that we can't get into that European spots and stay in there because of PSR, but we are also benefiting in the sense that we're almost likely to stay in the Premier League. So PSR hurts us, but I tell you what, it's also keeping us very comfortable, because those promoted teams cannot spend what we can because of PSR, because they can only lose 13 million per year as a championship club, whereas as a Premier League club, you can lose 35 million per year. So they just don't have the facility to spend what we can. So I don't think we can have it both ways. I think it's important for the Premier League, there's competition, and that whoever wins championship this season have hope that when they come up, they can stay up. Otherwise, what we might find is clubs coming up and going, well, we're not spending because we're going to go back down. So we're not going to spend. We're just going to bank the money, go back down and be the best team in the league again. And we're just going to keep banking the money and see what happens. What you cannot have is teams that come up and just don't have any hope. I think the 3 that have come up have got hope, shown ambition, and maybe at least one of them will do it. We'll find out in May. But Neil, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. You guys at home, if you enjoyed this podcast, please do drop a like on it. Sky News, Tartan, Geo and Neil's from the Anfield Wrap. You probably already know him, but if not, the link's in the description below. And I'll catch you in a bit.